The Age of Antonines in the Roman Empire. Roman Empire has been considered the most civilized and modernized civilization during the 2nd century of the Christian era. The frontiers of this vast monarchy were governed by the disciplined and ancient valour. They had a gentle yet powerful influence of their manners and law which had established the union of the several provinces of the Roman Empire. The inhabitants here enjoyed the luxurious life with advantages of wealth and prosperity and peace. In the Roman Empire, the Senate used to govern and rule the sovereign authority. The Senate delegated on the emperors, who had all the executive powers of the government. Roman Empire had a happy and prosperous period of almost a century, during which the Senate was governed by the honourable virtues of Trajan, Nerva, Hadrian, and 2 more Antonines. During this period itself, Rome witnessed the occurrence of the principal conquests. Rome encountered rapid succession and progress of the triumphs during the 7 first centuries, which was reserved for Augustus to renounce the design of the entire empire and to bring moderation into the public councils. During the era of Augustus, Rome witnessed profitable reflections which ensured the safety and dignity of Rome. He did not expose his legions and person to the arrows of the Parthians. Instead, he obtained an honourable treaty of the restitution of the prisoners which had been overtaken after the defeat of Crassus. During the 1st century of the Christian era, the only accession achieved by Roman Empire was the province of Britain. The war lasted for almost 40 years, which was maintained by the most profligate and was terminated by the most faint-hearted emperors of the era. The fact about Britain was that majority of its tribes possessed courage without conduct and had the love of freedom without any unity spirit. The Roman frontiers included the imperial policy, which commenced with the death of Augustus and lasted till the accession of Trajan. Trajan was a very virtuous and active prince who had the education of a soldier and possessed those talents of a general. He had a peaceful system with his predecessors which, however, got interrupted by scenes of conquest and war. The first exploits of Trajan occurred against the Dacians, who had insulted the majesty of Rome. Trajan was ambitious and famous, and his success rate was transient and highly rapid. He went on to triumph the river Tigris, ranging from the mountains of Armenia to the Persian Gulf. He always enjoyed the honour of being the topmost and as the only Roman general who went on to navigate remote seas. His fleets went on to ravage the Arabian coast as he approached towards the confines of India. But it was with the death of Trajan, which clouded the majestic prospect to be dreaded, that the distant nations would throw off the power achieved by the flourishing Roman Empire. The union and internal prosperity in the age of Antonines. The greatness of the Roman Empire cannot be alone judged by the extent or the rapidity of the conquests and successors. It was until a greater period that the Russian deserts occupied a larger portion of the globe. Alexander went on to erect the Macedonian trophy along the banks of the river Hyphasis. The obedient provinces of the Trajan and the Antonines were adorned by arts and were unified by law. The general principle of their government was simple, wise, and very beneficial. They relished on the religion of their ancestors and exalted to an equality of conquerors. The main policy of the Roman emperors and the Senate revolved around their religion and was enlightened and reflected by the superstitious beliefs and habits. There were various modes of religious worships which prevailed in the Roman Empire and were greatly considered by the local people and the philosophers as well. The superstitious beliefs of the individuals were not embittered by any theological bitterness. It was also not confined by the chains or shackles of any speculative system. The deities of the 1,000 streams and the 1,000 groves thrived in peace, nor did the Romans deprecate the wrath of the Tiber. The Romans, the Greeks, and the barbarians, persuaded themselves that under various names and ceremonies they all adored the same deities. It was not easy to conceive that the spirit of persecution would be able to introduce itself into the Roman councils. The Roman valued and understood the meaning and importance of religion and stayed connected with the Senate and the government. They even encouraged the public festivals, which tended to humanize the manners of the locals. They worshipped the arts of divination as an instrument of policy and respected the firmest bond of the society. Even after acknowledging the advantages of the religion, they were convinced that the various modes of worship had the same salutary purposes and received the same time and experience in the form of superstition. Rome was considered to be the capital of a great monarchy which was filled with strangers and subjects from each corner of the world. These were responsible for introducing and enjoying the superstitious beliefs of their native country. Every city in the Roman Empire was filled with the purity of the ancient ceremonies, and the Roman Senate had the common privilege to check the inundation of the foreign rites. Therefore, Rome gradually went on to become the common temple of all subjects, and the freedom of the cities was bestowed upon by all the goods of mankind. The constitution of the Roman Empire in the age of the Antonines. The definition of the Roman Empire in terms of a monarchy seemed to be that of a state which was governed by a single person, and he may be entrusted with the execution of the laws, the command of the army, and the management of the overall revenue. Every barrier of the Roman civilization and constitution had been balanced by the vast ambition of the dictator and had been eradicated by the cruel deeds of the triumvir. After Actium achieved victory, the fate of the Roman Empire depended on the will of the Octavianus known as Caesar and afterwards by Augustus. The conqueror was the leader of the 44 veteran legions who were conscious of their own strength and the weaknesses. The provinces, which were oppressed for long by the ministers of the Republic, wanted a government of a single person who could be the master and not the accomplice. The Roman people demanded only bread and public shows, which were supplied with open hands by Augustus. Augustus laid aside the tyrants by reforming the Senate and thus went on to profess himself as the father of the country. Augustus was elected as a censor, and with his faithful Agrippa, he went on to examine the list of the senators and even expelled a few members. He also persuaded nearly 200 people for the prevention of shame by a voluntary retreat which raised the qualification of a senator by £10,000. Augustus was also responsible for creating a vast number of patrician families and accepted himself as the honourable prince of the Senate, which was bestowed by the censors for being the most eminent in his services. But as Augustus went on to restore his dignity, he destroyed the independence of the Senate. The principles of the free Senate were lost. Augustus pronounced the studied oration before the modelling and the preparation of the assembly, which disguised his ambition and portrayed his patriotism. However, for the prosperity of the Roman Empire, it was deadly to trust the sincerity of Augustus. The advantages of monarchy or a republic often divided the speculations and presented the greatness of the Roman Empire. Amidst the increasing confusion, the reply of the Senate was decisive and anonymous. They failed to accept the resignation of Augustus and requested him to not leave the republic, which was saved only because of him. This incident took place many a time during the rule of Augustus, which was solemnized by the 10th year of his reign of the Roman Empire. With regard to the army and the soldiers, the jealousy of freedom had descended from the earliest span of the Roman Empire, which gave away substantial hopes of conquest and a sense of military discipline. The dictator or the consul had the ultimate right to command the Roman youth of its military services, and was even entitled to punish the cowardly disobedience or obstinate behaviour in the most severe forms of penalties. The most sacred rights of freedom were confirmed by the Sempronian and Porcian laws, which were suspended by the military engagement. The choice of the enemies and foes of Rome was decided by the legislative authority. The most important resolutions with respect to peace and war were the matters of debate in the Roman Senate and were ratified by the locals. The rise and fall of the Pertinax. Marcus was milder by nature, had become the most amiable defective part of his character. He had an excellent understanding which was often deceived by the goodness of his nature and heart. He had an excessive indulgence to his brother, his son, his wife, and became a role of the public injury. Faustina, who was the wife of Marcus and daughter of Pius, was known for her beauty. However, she was also negligent and irregular in her unbounded passion, which was unknown to Marcus. He even went on to promote his wife's lovers to the post of profits and honour. Most of the crimes which disrupted the internal peace of the society were produced by the restraints imposed by the unequal laws on the appetites of mankind. Son of Marcus went on to succeed his father amidst the triumphs of the armies and the Senate. When he took the throne, there were no competitors or enemies to fight with around him. Therefore, he preferred the love of mankind in this state of peacefulness and calm. The young prince and his favourites celebrated the licence of the sovereign power. However, he had not yet fought a single battle and had only displayed a sentiment of generosity. Marcus had formed an assembly to be considered as the great council of the nation and was comprised of the most eminent Romans, which soon went on to become criminal in its niche. The Antonines, who respected their virtues and had delight in their union, formed a great military command which became a signal victory over Greece. In the civilized and stable state of the Roman Empire, the wild beasts retired from the face of the mankind and the neighbourhood of the famous cities. To transport them to Rome and to surprise them in their solitude, it was a kind of enterprise which was equally ridiculous for the people and the princes. In all these exhibitions, the most secure precautions were taken, which were used to preserve the person of the Roman Hercules, who might have disregarded the dignity of the emperor or the sanctity of the god. The finances and its management of the Roman Empire were the most attentive and vigilant care of the emperor or the Senate. Every measure of extortion and injustice had been adopted, which was meant to collect the property of the subjects into the prince's coffers. The people who remembered the virtues and values of the Marcus were happy and content to contemplate their new features in bearing the traits of the original as they wished to enjoy the benign influence of his rule and administration. Amidst the general joys, the Praetorian Guards betrayed the inward dissatisfaction due to their angry and sullen countenance. Civil wars and victory of Severus. The power of the sword is felt greatly in an extensive and vast monarchy in comparison to a small community. It has been calculated by the politicians that no state can maintain above the power of the 100th members in arms and idleness unless being completely exhausted. Although this proportion might be uniform, the influence that army has over the rest of the society will vary greatly according to the degree of the positive strength. There can be no exertions made on the benefits of the military discipline and science unless a considerable number of soldiers are united in one body and activated by one person. With just a handful of men, this kind of union could serve as ineffectual and would be impracticable where the powers of the machine could destroy the excessive weights or the extreme minuteness of the springs. In order to illustrate this observation, we would need to reflect that there is no superiority of the natural strength, acquired skill, or the artificial weapons. This would enable one single man to keep the constant subjection of 100 of the fellow creature, and the tyrant of a single town, or even a small village or district, to soon discover that hundreds of disciplined soldiers will command 10 million of subjects. The Praetorian bands of the Roman Empire, whose furious and licentious nature became the first symptom and the cause of the decline of the Roman Empire. The Praetorian bands derived their institution from Augustus. They were crafty tyrants, sensibly made the Roman Senate to come in awe which could either crush or prevent the motions of the rebellion. Augustus discriminated the favoured troops by superior privileges and high pay, but their formidable aspect would have been alarmed and would have irritated the Roman people as the remainders were dispersed along the adjacent towns of Italy. The introduction of the Praetorian Guards into the palace and the Roman Senate, through which the emperors taught them to perceive their own powers and strengths and the weaknesses of the civil government, was used to lay aside the mystery towards an imaginary power. Their pride was nourished by the sense of irresistible power in the luxurious idleness of the opulent city. It was also not possible to conceal anything from them, and the leading person of the Roman sovereign, the public treasure, the authority of the Senate, and the seat of the empire were all in the possession of their hands. In order to divert or divulge the Praetorian bands from the dangerous reflections, the best established and the firmest were obligated to blend the cajolery with commands, rewards with punishments, to indulge in their prides, to flatter themselves, to purchase their faith on the accession of every new emperor since the elevation of the Claudius. The advocate of the gods needed to be justified by arguments the powers which were asserted by their arms, and they needed to maintain it according to the purest form of the constitution. The election of the generals, consuls, and that of the magistrates were the ancient and the ultimate rights of the Roman cities. These assertions became unanswerable gradually as the Praetorians increased their weights like the barbarian conquerors of the Roman Empire. The Praetorians had violated the piety of the throne by the murder of Pertinax and had dishonoured the majestic conduct. Their camp was without a leader, and amidst all the wild disorder and misconduct, the emperor's father-in-law, Supplicianus, and the governor of the city had been sent to the camp on the first alarm of mutiny. With history making us observe every principle and passion which yields to the ambitious dictates, it is very scarce that in these horrifying moments Supplicianus had aspired to triumph the throne which was polluted with recent killing and blood of a prince. He had already started his effectual argument as a threat to the imperial dignity, which proclaimed that the Roman Empire had to be disposed of the best and the most efficient bidder by means of a public auction. This infamous offer, and the most insolent of its kind, diffused a sense of shame, grief, and indignation throughout the empire. This somehow reached Didius Julianus, who was a wealthy senator of Rome and had indulged himself in the luxury of the Senate table. His wife and daughter, including his parasites and freedmen, convinced him easily that he deserved the throne and made him embrace the opportunity. The old man hurried to the Praetorian camp where Supplicianus was with his guards, and he began to bid against the foot of the rampart. Supplicianus had promised a donation of £160 to each soldier. Julian was eager for this prize and rose the total amount to whopping £200. In this way he was declared the emperor, and he took an oath of allegiance from the military. It now became obligatory for the Praetorians to satisfy the conditions of the sale. They offered their new sovereign and surrounded him on all sides from their shields. The Senate was assembled, and those who had been recognized as close friends or enemies of Julian affected the common share of satisfaction. After this, Julian filled the Senate with his armed soldiers and eminent virtues to get full affections and assurance from the Senate. The assembly, which was gathered, congratulated themselves and engaged their alliance with him on several branches of the imperial power. From the Roman Senate, Julian could spot the abandoned trunk of the Pertinax and the economical entertainment which was prepared for his dinner. He viewed one with indifference and the other with contempt. Even after the magnificent feast and the maddening crowd, he was left with darkness, solitude, and sleepless nights. He thought over the fate of his predecessors and the dangerous tenure of the Roman Empire, which would be purchased by money. Every move he made betrayed his trembling confusion. He insisted that Severus should be made the public enemy of the Roman Senate. He even tried to question the fates, magic, and the superstitious beliefs, and the unlawful sacrifices, but all in vain. The death of Severus. When one achieves greatness, however steep or dangerous it might seem, it entertains the active consciousness and has the power to exercise itself. But the possession of an empire or a throne could never lead to an everlasting satisfaction to any ambitious mind. This melancholy was truly felt and experienced by Severus. He elevated to the first place of mankind through fortune and merit. He considered himself great and felt distracted with care for preserving the empire, and was careless of his fame and oversatiated with power. These all factors made all the prospects of his life closed. Severus was true to his African traits, and thus got passionate and addicted to the study of divination and magic. He got himself deeply versed in the interpretation of the omens and dreams, and acquainted well with science of judicial astrology. He had already lost his first wife. Sooner he discovered that the young lady Emesa in Syria had a royal background, and therefore he proceeded to ask for her hand. Julia Domna was her name, and she possessed that attraction of beauty and had a firmness of mind and judgmental strength. Her amicable qualities never made any dark impression on her husband, but during her son's rule she was the head of the administration of the personal affairs of the Roman Empire. She was the perfect patroness of art and was very friendly to the genius men. She produced 2 sons, Geta and Carcalla, who were supposed to be the destined emperors. However, all these aspirations of the hopeful father and the Roman Empire proved vain by these princes, who were absent of any great talent or virtue and had an unforgiving antipathy for each other. The unhappy conflict of his 2 sons clouded all his dreams, and it threatened the throne, which was raised with much labour and had cemented much patriotic blood, and was guarded with extremes of treasure and arms. However, Severus remained impartial to both his sons, and granted to both the rank of Augustus with the prestigious name of Antoninus, such that it was for the first time that the Roman Empire witnessed 3 emperors. Severus had, however, foreseen that one of his weaker sons would fall to the sacrifice of the stronger one, who would again be ruined by his own acts. As years passed by, the declining health of Severus inflamed the wild passions and the black ambition of Carcalla's mind. He wished to shorten the remaining days of his father's life, and had even tried to create a mutiny among the troops, but in vain. Finally, in the 65th year of his life, Severus passed away, and as per the salutary advice, both the sons were elected as the emperors of the Roman Empire. The elevation and tyranny of Maximin. Out of all the forms of the governments which have prevailed in the world since ages, a hereditary monarchy seems to be the fairest in the scope for ridicule. It is possible to relate that on the demise of the father, the property of the entire nation somehow descends to his son, who is yet unknown to himself and the mankind, and has not even seen or witnessed the wisest statesmen and the bravest warriors. As retirement approaches, the imaginary forms of the future government might be devised in a faint light, and which shall continue to bestow on the most worthy of the entire community. As experience is achieved, these fairy illusions fade away and teach us the lesson that the election of a monarch depute the wisest or to the maximum group of the people of an empire. The army of the nation is the only part which remains united in the same sentiments, and is powerful enough to impose their powers on the fellow citizens. Even in the East, the factor of contention is limited by the reigning princes. But in the Roman Empire, the authority of the Senate had ground into contempt and was witnessing a huge scene of confusion and dilemma. The royal families, including the nobles and the provinces, had long been guided in triumph before the superior republicans. The ancient families of the Roman Empire had fallen beneath the tyranny of the Caesars. while the princes were chained by the Commonwealth and were disappointed by the constant failure of their predecessors. Therefore, it became quite impossible for any idea of hereditary succession into the minds of their subjects. The right to the throne now was assumed to be from merit and could not be claimed by birth. After the murder of Alexander Severus and the elevation of the Maximin, no emperor or ruler considered himself safe once upon the throne. When the Senate appointed 2 princes, they were activated by the secret desire that the division could weaken the supreme magistrate. This policy was effectual, but it proved fatal to both the emperors and even to the Senate. The jealousy of the power soon incensed the difference of the character. The whole Roman city was engulfed in the Capitoline Games, and the emperors were left alone in the palace. All of a sudden, they were alarmed by the sudden news of the approaching desperate assassins. They seized the emperors from the Senate, stripped them and dragged them through the streets of Rome, giving an unfortunate and brutal death to the princes. Gordian, who had received the title of Caesar, was saluted as Augustus, and he became the next emperor. He was dear to the people and the Senate, and his young age promised long tenure of the military license and the submission of the Roman Empire to the Praetorian Guards. He went on to save the Republic and regained its freedom and dignity from the horrors of the civil war in the capital city. The state of Persia. From the time of the rule of the Augustus to the reign of Alexander Severus, the enemies of the Roman Empire were confined. The soldiers and the tyrants, including the prosperity of the empire, gave feeble attention that anything might happen beyond the Euphrates and the Rhine. However, as the empire ascended in its new era, the military forces had weakened, and the power of the prince and the laws of the Senate were given in front of the barbarians of the east and the north, who strongly attacked and hid the declining monarchy. After a long span of calamities, several tribes of the victorious invaders had established themselves in the provinces of the Roman Empire. In the early ages, when Europe was covered with forests, it offered a great retreat to the wandering savages. These were the inhabitants of Asia, who collected into small, populous cities and was reduced under the influence of the vast empires, luxury, arts and despotism. The Assyrians ruled over the east unless the sovereignty of Semiramis and Ninus were lost from their hands. The Babylonians and the Medes divided their power and were already swallowed under the monarchy of the Persians. Xerxes, who was the descendant of Cyrus, followed by around 2 million men, invaded Greece. This followed a period of great revolution which had a great impact on the Roman Empire during the tenure of the Alexander Severus, as many as 266 years after the Christian era. During the long period of slavery of Persia under the Parthian and Macedonian era, the nations of Asia and Europe had mutually corrupted and adopted the superstitions of each other's cultures. The principles of Zoroaster, the ancient philosopher and preacher of the Persians, were still in practice in the East. While the rest of the mankind was led away in the shackles of enmity, the faithful Persians reserved their religious adorations for sharing the glory of the triumph of Ormuzd, the protector. The theories of Zoroaster were strongly comprehended by the foreigners and even by his disciples, as it laid the foundation of the simple philosophy of the Persian worship. The tip of the mountains has been considered to be the places of sacrifices. The prayers and hymns form the principal modes of worship of the supreme God, who is present to fill the wide and vast circle of heaven and is the object to whom all the prayers are being addressed. The Persians have considered the elements of nature like fire, water, sun, the winds, light, known as the Mitra, which have been known to be the objects of religious importance, as they are the purest symbols and the most powerful agents of the divine nature and the divine power. The decline of the Roman Empire. The invading army had reached the outskirts of the Roman Empire, which were left completely undefended. In around the time of 410 Christian era, the Visigoths, which was led by Alaric, had reached the walls of the Roman Empire and had sacked its capital city. The Visigoths charred the city of its glory by looting, burning and pillaging all through their way of the city and causing destruction everywhere. This continued for 3 days, when for the first time in its historical journey, the Roman Empire was in the hands of the intruders other than the Romans. The most significant factor which led to the downfall of the Roman Empire was the rise of Christianity, a new religion. Christianity, which followed the principle of monotheistic, was against the ancient religious culture of the Roman Empire, which believed in polytheistic. In around the time of 313 Christian era, the then Roman Emperor Constantine the Great declared acceptance of Christianity, and thus it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. This considerable change in the religious policy of the Roman Empire spread Christianity to every corner of the province. As Christianity was approved in the empire, the Roman state started undermining its own ancient religious beliefs and practices. The Romans even started believing their emperor their god. However, this countered with the belief of Christianity, which did not consider the emperor as the god. This gradually weakened and ended the authority of the emperor. Another change which was brought to the Roman Empire by Constantine the Great was the splitting of the empire into 2 provinces, the Western Rome and the Eastern Constantinople, a city named after himself. This too aggravated the downfall of the Roman Empire. The Western Rome spoke Latin and the Eastern Constantinople spoke Greek. The Westerns were Roman Catholic and the Eastern practiced Orthodox branch of the Christian Church. As time passed, the Eastern Constantinople thrived and the Western Rome declined gradually. The Eastern Empire of the Constantinople continued to thrive as the Byzantine Empire for a long period of time. Therefore, the splitting of the Rome too accelerated to the downfall of the entire Roman Empire. Several other fundamental reasons too contributed to the downfall of the Roman Empire. The Western Rome was ailing in terms of economy, as the decrease in the agricultural productivity led to the increase in the price of the food. The western half of the Roman Empire witnessed a great amount of trade deficits in comparison to the eastern half. The western half purchased the goods of luxury from the east, but they had nothing to offer in return or exchange. To balance the lack of money, the government of the western half started producing more coins which had less silver content. This resulted in inflation and finally the attacks and the piracy by the German tribes disrupted the entire trading business, especially in the western province of the Roman Empire. This too contributed greatly to the downfall of the Roman Empire. In around 476 CE, Christian era, Romulus, who was the last emperor of the Roman Empire, was defeated badly by Odoacer, the Germanic leader. Thus, he became the first barbarian to rule the Roman Empire. As a result, the state of order that the Western Europe had witnessed for thousands of years under the influence of the Roman Empire was no more.